are going to dive directly into the second of 3 sessions in our Transforming Science Scientific Symposium. I think the first session has already unpacked and put on the table so many things to nourish these 2 subsequent discussions. Now, this one particularly is going to explore the reasons why, the reasons for, but the challenges to achieve and the opportunities to be grabbed, I know, both sides of the same coin, in transforming research cultures. Again, just a little bit of what's behind it. Societal transformation, as we see, relies more and more on scientific expertise, and this has been thrown into sharp relief, as was acknowledged in the opening session, by the pandemic. But conversely, experts and their institutions, in fact, the entire scientific system itself, is experiencing more and more pressure for society from a variety of different areas and mechanisms. So our discussions with 5 speakers are going to focus on the internal drivers of trust in science and research, so build a little bit more on that, how we can improve the trustworthiness of our research cultures by transforming how things are published, how things are assessed, how research careers are assessed, and also importantly, how standards for research integrity are set. We are going to look at the opportunities that are there because there is this kind of interconnectedness between stakeholders, the research organizations, the funding bodies. We heard a little bit about that this morning, the publishers, the policymakers. How can we get them having the right conversations in the right way and working together to build sustainable relationships between science and policy? Who do we have in this session? Let's have a quick look, if I can make that work. Nobody. There we go. We've got absolutely no. It's just me blathering on with no experience at all. Let's have a look. How do I go down? No. All right, well, I'll tell you who we've got, and then somebody will come and help me sort this, because I don't know how to do that bit. Never mind. Do you want to help me? Thank you. We've got Professor Maria Leptin. We've got Leptin, the President of the European Research Council, as from November 2021. Prior to that, she was Director of EMBO, which is an organization of more than 1,800 leading researchers promoting excellence in the life sciences in Europe and beyond, and she's done many other things. I keep the bios short. We've got Professor Antonio Loprieno, who became the president of ALLEA in May 2018. I love this. Antonio, you studied Egyptology, linguistics and Semitic studies at the University of Turin. Just fun. I could actually have you up here and just talk about that for the next hour. We've got Mark Schiltz. He was appointed Secretary General of the FNR in 2011, and he's also President of Science Europe, which is an association of major European research funding and research performing organizations. And he's got his expertise, so if you want to pose questions, is very much rooted in strategic research management and organization, so a brilliant person to have on the stage with us. We've got Dr. Magdalena Skipper, who actually I should have recognized from the beginning, Editor-in-Chief of Nature and Chief Editorial Advisor for Nature Research. Her background is as a geneticist. And she's got a lot of editorial and publishing experience, so can certainly weigh in on that issue of science communication, and is also very passionate about mentorship and innovation and research integrity, which, as I said, is part of the conversation now. And we have Andrea Pitto, who is a historian and professor at the Department of Gender Studies at the Central European University, Vienna, Austria, and a Doctor of Science at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. So she's done a lot of work. This is her real focus: gender, politics, Holocaust, war. She's been awarded various prizes, so absolutely the right person to have on our panel today. So there we go. Let me remind you, questions, keep them short. Do raise your hands, okay? We're going to create more space to answer those questions, but we need to have a framing speech, a framing presentation at the beginning. So can I please ask Professor Maria Leptin, who is President of the European Research Council, to come and shove me off the pupitre? Voila, there you go. You can also I make you give warm rounds of applause. And I use this mic and then I go away. What's the main thrust? What are you going to frame? What are you going to dive into for us?
Well, I think I'll question some of the principles and ideas. And I think if I have to say in one word where I'll end up is, we'd better be honest about what we do, be clear and honest. But maybe this will become clearer when I'm done. Happy to have you stay here. You are so entertaining.
You if I'm right
Yeah,
here?
yeah, exactly. We do a little double
I'm
bill.
going to go and scribble down there.
Okay, fine. Good morning, everyone. Dear colleagues, if I may call you that, but I think I may. I feel I'm one of you, which is a great privilege. And many thanks for inviting me here today. It's an honor. And the topic of our discussion, transforming research culture, as an overall theme of transforming science, is of course something I care a lot about, the ERC cares a lot about, and we all should have at our heart. But it's also a very broad theme, and I think we need to unpack it a little. So I think we need to ask, why do we feel the need to transform science and our research culture? What's wrong with it at the moment, with the current practice of science and our current research cultures? The program for the session suggests that experts, their institutions, and the entire scientific system are under pressure from society. The idea of the session is to explore how transitioning to open science, reforming the way we assess science, and improving science communication can help to restore trust in science. There's obviously a number of pressures on the research community that could imply some need for change or even transformation. But these pressures clearly come from very different sources, are generated by different motivations, and imply different reactions. There are different pressures in different research sectors. For example, there's a difference between the pressures in higher education and those in public sector research systems, never mind private sector research. We talk about issues in research of science, when what we actually mean is that there's specific problems, for example, facing our universities. And finally, the situations in different countries across Europe are very different. So there will be no one solution fits all. But first of all, I would like to suggest that the problem of societal trust in science, which we're talking about here, is perhaps not even the overriding issue. Over the years, survey after survey has been done, and just a couple of weeks ago, the latest version of the Edelman Trust Barometer has been published. It's an annual survey that's been going on for 22 years, and the latest one actually did come up with some alarming findings. So, in fact, the headline they used was this: "We find a world ensnared in a vicious cycle of distrust fueled by a growing lack of faith in media and government. Through disinformation and division, these two institutions," notice we're not quoted there, "are feeding the cycle and exploiting it for commercial and political gain." Now, that's pretty grim wording, and makes one think we're right to think about this here today, which we are, of course. And if you add this to the gloomy views of people who bemoan the effects of of social media and disinformation and political polarization, then of course the picture looks even worse. So there clearly is a need for thinking about trustworthiness in science. But what the Edelman survey also finds is that scientists are actually the most trusted group, with 75% of the population trusting scientists versus 42 trusting government and 46 trusting journalists. So we're not that bad off. And this is simply the latest in a long row of findings that find similar things. And in fact, it turns out that during the pandemic, trust in science seems to have grown, if we believe the surveys. So that's sort of the opposite of what you would expect if you follow the tide of disinformation narrative. Another interesting point is from the Edelman findings is that it shows that the trust in science is highest among those that they term well-informed. That's those people who read more than one paper, who look at various sources of information, including sources of information that disagree with them. So that already tells us something. And it has in fact been argued that people have not stopped being interested in science or stopped being interested in finding the truth, but rather that they've stopped believing the institutions tasked with communicating the truth. So before the internet, people would read a trusted paper and believe that. But with the internet and with the deluge of information from various sources, people are less happy with gatekeepers who control the information they get. So they turn to many sources and often don't know how to handle that. So people are actually hungry for high quality information. And that's, of course, what the scientific enterprise and what scientists try to provide. And in fact, the EU has been quite active in taking action to tackle disinformation, in which it gives a leading role to researchers and scientists. So there must be trust in scientists, at least somewhere. Now, one of the reasons why I think we all agree that one can trust us in finding science is that we don't trust ourselves. How do I mean that? I think the reason we produce high quality knowledge is our dedication to questioning how things are. Not only how things are, that's what research is about. We try to figure out what the world is and how the world works, but also questioning in what we ourselves think. So my predecessor, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, spoke to you a few years ago about the importance about spreading knowledge of the scientific method more widely, and I totally agree. As scientists, we've been trained to systematically look at any information we are exposed to in a critical way, because we know that things might look different at a first look than they do once we've dug deeper. Jim Al-Khalili, in his latest book, The Joys of Science, says that not properly communicating the importance of uncertainty and debate in science is one of the main problems we face. So not the truth itself, but the way we get there and the way we handle it when explaining how we develop our scientific understanding of the world. So it's not so much, like I said, the scientific facts that aren't communicated, but it's that people don't know how the scientific method works. And therefore, if we say 98% certain, they'll say, well, but you know, why not 100%? So I don't need to take seriously what you say. I think that's a profound misunderstanding and a profound failure in communicating, and that's what we've got to get across. Now, I'm not downplaying the problems of trust in our society, but I'm suggesting that science is part of the solution and not the problem. So if we wish to transition to open science or reform research assessment or communicate science better, then we should do it because these are worthwhile activities on their own, rather than because we're sort of frantically trying to reestablish trust with society. So let me tell you a little bit about what the ERC does in these areas. So for one thing, ever since its creation, the ERC has been a strong supporter of the idea that results stemming from publicly funded research, including publications, primary data, code, etc., should be made freely accessible. In December 2006, before even the first grant was awarded, the Scientific Council issued its first statement on open access, which was followed by further guides demanding open access, and since 2014, this is completely mandatory. The ERC Council also closely followed the current debate on reforming research assessment. And in fact, I've put in place a task force that will be looking at research assessment. Demands for changing research assessment are coming from many places, all of them justified, all of them with gripes that we can understand. And I think it's important that we analyze very carefully what it is we want to achieve in the different conditions. And so the task force is looking at that. It's looking at the various proposals and recommendations. And we will see what lessons we can learn, and we'll publish that later this year, I hope, and engage in the public debate on this. I think this is very important. The ERC also takes science communication very seriously. There have been several initiatives. There's a public engagement with research award. Winners of the second edition of this will be announced this year at the ESOF meeting in July. In September, we will announce a scheme of placement of journalists in research institutions. So again, it's not so much that we ask the researchers to explain their facts, but that we get journalists or journalists in the broadest sense, to understand how the scientific method works, give them access to scientists, and let them learn and communicate how that works. They're the expert communicators, not so much the scientists themselves, though some are fantastic, of course. And then we have a citizen science event scheduled on the 7th of September, which will look at how ERC grantees are engaging the public in their research, which many do in a very inspiring way. That'll happen here in Brussels. So we can actually, can and do, and I'm sure many of you do too, take action in all of these areas without linking them to a grand narrative by just doing them. So now I want to get to this danger, or to the let's think aspect of what we're doing and how we can ensure scientific trust, trust of society in science. I think there is a part of this narrative, namely that science needs to rebuild trust, which is potentially harmful. And that's the idea that science needs to have more impact or to be directed at solving societal challenges in order to be understood and supported by society. I think that's possibly pernicious. Of course, we need governments and citizens to support us. That's important. We all care about it and we all depend on it. There are political pressures to justify budgets. And there are indeed many urgent problems that need to be solved. I mean, we heard only last week that the 1.5 degree temperature increase is going to be hit much sooner than we thought. So we do urgently need solutions there. But research and science in the widest sense, i.e. the quest for knowledge, at its core is, after all, an attempt to understand the world around us. And that's essential. And that's, of course, why the ERC supports excellent scientists from anywhere in the world, any age, from any field of research, with no predetermined targets. This approach can be confusing for politicians and policymakers and administrators, and in fact, even some of the panel members in the ERC who keep asking, why don't we spend the money to solve society's problems? Everyone's under pressure to deliver results in the short term, especially when we are confronted with major crises. And it's, of course, very tempting to promise we'll fund scientists to solve climate change or to cure cancer. That's much easier to say than we'll fund scientists to sit in their ivory tower and work on whatever they like. That's hard to defend. But the philosophy, at least of the ERC, and I'm sure many of your funders, rests on the idea that researchers actually know best the most promising areas to explore. They know where the unknown is that needs to be solved. And we actually know that without understanding the world, we can't manipulate the world. We cannot find solutions to influence the world in the way that we need. And the world means our bodies, making medicines, working on climate change, etc. We cannot affect the world if we don't deeply understand the world. So the understanding has to come first. And in fact, new findings in one area can open up new opportunities in completely different areas. We know that from technology, the internet, etc., etc. And therefore, putting all our resolve and all our funds into one area may actually be counterproductive and not solve that, because the solution would come from a completely different area. And indeed, I would argue that this serving citizens by focusing on crises, on solving societal problems, is a kind of scientific populism that is not very goal-oriented, counterproductively. Because, in fact, science is hard. And admitting that should be a vital part of how we communicate it. If we look at the way we got the vaccines last year, a couple of years ago, the mRNA vaccines against COVID-19, we know that it took many years, decades of work from dedicated scientists all around the world, not only to understand how RNA works, but also find ways of reliably delivering vaccines, etc. And some of these scientists were not at all rewarded well while they were doing that work, and were in fact ignored and poo-pooed. in particular Katalin Karika, who is now, of course, being heaped, as we heard yesterday from the Commissioner, with prizes, well-deserved. So my thesis is that over-promising what we can do and then under-delivering because we can't deliver, because we've promised the wrong thing, is a sure way to undermine faith in any area, and it would be really a bitter irony if well-meaning efforts to make science seem more relevant to the public would actually lead to undermining faith in science. Thank you, and I'm sure
Thank you very much. I'm going to do a different thing. I'm not going to ask you, because you're going to sit on our panel at the moment. So I think we're missing, oh my God, and as if by magic. Honestly, Matthäus was about to say, we're missing a chair. And I turned and, oh, there you were, like a mirage. You brought a chair. Can I invite, please, thank you so very much. Come just for a moment. What I would like to say, what's very cheering is that you did say, you know, what is hugely important, and it does pick up from comments that we had from the audience this morning and comments from our speakers, that it's to spread more the knowledge of the scientific method and to embed that sort of comfort with the fact that there is uncertainty and it is evolving. I mean, we took up, the gentleman made that very important point, you know, the UK government saying, follow the science, which has actually done more harm than good, and it hasn't sort of built in this uncertainty and this evolution. But come and take a seat, please. Can I invite all of you to come? I was going to invite you back, Eric. Do you want to come back? Anyway, sit on the edge of the stage. Can I invite all of our lovely speakers to sit in? Let me take that. Here we have. Oh, I'm so rubbish with these. Good lordy, lordy, lordy. Oof. So welcome. I'm going to let everybody know how we're going to manage this so you all are clear how you can raise your voices. So at that end, of course, we have Professor Antonio Loprieno, then we have Dr. Magdalena Skipper, here we have Andrea Petto. You're not saying that's fine just to be nice, are you? Is it? Yeah. Oh, that's so awful. Oh, that's... Okay, there we've had our first speaker, Professor Maria Leptin, and here we have Mark Schiltz next to me. So here's the deal. This is a huge area, right? Okay, so we decided to break it down. All of our lovely speakers know this. We're breaking it down into 3 key areas. Open science, because you helpfully led the way there. Research assessment, and also communication, science communication. That means, given we're going to break at 1:45, okay, we're going to take 15 minutes for each area, okay? I'm going to give these good people a chance to share their thoughts. I'm going to see if I can take a couple of questions from those of you who are online and a couple of questions from the room. But I'm doing the maths with my abacus now, so you know how we're trying to steer this conversation. And of course, there will be overlaps. But if we can try and stick to that, I think we can make a more kind of, we can come out with something concrete. I'm not sure you want to come out with something concrete. So I don't mind who. Shall I start with you from ALLEA? I think that would be a very good idea, Professor Loprieno. Can I call you by first names? Or you don't like that? It's
yes,
okay. Let's look at this open science. And maybe perhaps you can pick up what we heard there from the ERC in terms of your points of view on open science, how it can better promote quality, transparency, avoid overlaps, and also accountability. And whether you think it's going fast enough, and if it's not, how can we speed it up?
Okay, well, I was struck by many things in what Professor Leptin said, but one thing I was struck and reassured at the same time, that what she said about what the ERC is doing in this area pretty much covers also what ALLEA is doing in this area. And I suppose that this would apply to Mark for Science Europe or to Michael Murphy for the European University Association. And that has to do with the fact that open science responds to a change in our access to knowledge. Mm-hmm. We come from a tradition, let's say an analog tradition, of basically individual knowledge. Mm-hmm. Our knowledge was historically connected with the idea of one author. Mm-hmm. And we move now to a different type of access to knowledge, which is a social type of knowledge, in which it is more difficult, in which the primary authorship is not really individual, but is rather social or communal. And that represents the source of this translation, as it were, of the production of science into some kind of delivery, communication of science, which informs many of our actions as researchers, individual researchers, but also as responsibles for one particular institution.
Okay, thank you. And just to say, and then I will move on very swiftly, I'm not sure how it fits, but yesterday I was moderating on the precautionary principle. It's the end of a project that came, under Horizon, and it very, very interesting how it sits with the innovation principle. And they had said that in part of this process there was moving from evidence-based to evidence-informed and actionable knowledge. And for me, this kind of fits into all of this whole context.
Absolutely. That is precisely the point that Maria was making about the difficulty to convey the method, right? Because through this transition, it becomes complicated to actually provide at the same time the contents of the research and the frame within which this research operates. And that is this transformational change that we are all dealing with.
Okay. What can you bring, please, to the table from your perspective on this issue of open science? How can it help? Do we need to speed it up? Some of the obstacles to that, and how we can kind of embed perhaps better progress?
So maybe the most interesting way for me to contribute is actually to weave in together some of the things that were said already in the context of what I as an editor and we as a science publisher can bring to this. I think it's a very exciting and tremendous time in science and in research more broadly that we are talking about opening up the process and opening up access to all of the so-called research objects, deliverables of science itself. And it's not only about the access to knowledge and the tools and the outcomes of science. And by the way, most emphatically, these are not just papers. I think we've been talking for a very long time about the fact that science, of course, as part of their work, delivers so much more than writing papers. And yet, and now I'm looping into a later point in discussion that's about recognition and reward of scientific effort. Yet we have excluded all these other things that scientists engage in from recognizing the contributions that they make. One other thing that I would say that I think we haven't surfaced yet in the context of open science, and it alludes a little bit to what you said about that notion that science is somehow produced by individuals. We all know that that's not the case. Individuals can lead projects, can advance projects by ideas, but it's always been, certainly for the last 100 years, it's been a group activity, and increasingly so is becoming that. And open science shifts our focus from an individual to collaboration. It enables collaborations in so many more ways than we could ever imagine before. And I think that's a really important aspect of open science. And of course, as publishers, we can support that, we enable that. You know, Nature is published by Springer Nature, and Springer Nature's motto is advancing discovery. And of course, what better way to advance discovery than through open science?
Thank you very much. Now, very interesting to come to you, Andrea, because if we even use the word open, you have been, I can't think of a better word, sort of the victim of an entire lack of openness in a much sort of wider context. But given what you've heard here and your personal story and these two first contributions, what would you like to say about this issue? Do you see obstacles? What's your view on open science? How do we make that progress and how do we measure it?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be here. The personal story the moderator is referring to is, of course, the forced moving of Central European University from Budapest to Vienna, also the deleting of the accredited 2-year MA program from the study list in Hungary, and also my resignation from the Hungarian Accreditation Committee. So when this word open science comes in, of course, the main question is why now? And what were those failures? What were those problems which actually made this word a buzzword? Because open science is not free science. Open science is a response to this populist attack and the populist threat to science, because the basis of the European knowledge production is that liberal values and the university system and the research system are necessarily connected. And the new situation is that illiberalism, authoritarianism, let me open a bracket here, of course political scientists are ready to die for a better terminology, are questioning this kind of connection. And what we see is that how open science as a concept, as a process, is actually instrumentalized, hijacked, and used by the different illiberal science policy. And we see different parallel institutions, universities being set up, and they are exactly using the cracks of the university system, the academic system, in order to get in there. We know that, we hope that through the crack, light is coming in, but sometimes the darkness comes in. So therefore, the issue of open science is extremely dangerous, extremely tricky, and because it takes the focus away from the real issue, which is, who is financing and who is paying for what kind of knowledge, what are the geopolitical consequences, and what we learned in the previous crisis, which is called this polycrisis. This is the new buzzword in this polycrisis, is that there is such a thing as dangerous knowledge. There is such a thing as unnecessary knowledge, and there is a very different societal challenge, which is about it is not about how we are communicating the truth. This is the fundamental question, how knowledge is being produced. And by now, in Hungary, there is an institution which is much richer than Oxford, which, the dragon already hatched, which is the center of a kind of international network of alternative academies and institutions. And the question is how long the European academies and universities allow themselves to sleepwalk among those circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will give you all a chance in a moment to come back. I'm going to let everybody lay out their stall. There is a question that's come in, and we will, of course, take a couple from the floor. I will do the best possible maths. Well, what do you want to say, first of all? What can you bring to the table? What resonated in what you heard? And tell us your perspective on open science and your organisation.
Well, thank you. I think I would very much join in with Antonio about this transitioning understanding of science. Science is much more understood nowadays, or scientific knowledge is much more understood nowadays as a common good, a common global public good. And that's what open science is about, to make that available, that common good to the whole of the scientific community and beyond. And of course, I think the COVID crisis has also been a triumph for open science. Not perfect, as we heard yesterday. So much data and papers were openly shared. Not always in a way, so we still have to learn there, not always in a way that made it really usable by other scientists. So we have to learn some lessons there. But I think globally and generally, it was a stark demonstration of what open science, open sharing of data sets, and even publications. I mean, even the most reluctant legacy publishers have accepted that there should be no embargo periods on papers related to COVID-19. Of course, you can then ask why COVID-19, is cancer research less important, and so on, but that's a different discussion. So I think this idea of science as a global public good is very present and very important. But let me say, let me light it through another perspective. I think it's also inherent in the scientific method. And that's why open science is not just in my view, a nice add-on which society now asks or demands from scientists. I think it is very, very much at the center of the scientific method, because what distinguishes scientific knowledge from other type of knowledge? Scientific knowledge is knowledge that can be tested and put to the scrutiny of other scientists. So you cannot just say something, you must open, and there is where open science is so important, because in order to do that, in order for other scientists and researchers to be able to actually check and scrutinize the findings, data and publications must be, and other objects must be made openly available. And by putting data behind paywalls or publication behind paywalls, we're actually hurting the scientific process in its very foundation. So I think that's equally important. It is very much at the center, and it goes through this distinction between what is scientific knowledge and what is other type of knowledge, fake knowledge, and all the things that we have to confront now.
Maybe also grab that mic, or we can do it as or there's another one actually, Maria, if you can take that one, then we look like Las Vegas lounge singers otherwise, sharing a microphone. Just a quick question before I move on, and there's a question that's come in also for you specifically, Magdalena. Just to say, going back to what we heard there at the beginning, let me take this from Maria, when she said, listen, I think, researchers also know what needs to be solved and what is less uncertain, and if I'm paraphrasing you wrongly, please tell me, and that scientific populism and kind of saying science should be directed towards solving specific and all societal problems can be, I think the word you said was pernicious. So in what you've just said as science as a global public good, how does that fit? How do you see that comment there? Either of you? Yeah. Should be, if it's red, it's working, obviously.
Okay, it's on. Yes, so what I meant, of course, was that if we say what the politicians like to say, what they think society wants to hear. Mm-hmm. And that's where the danger comes in. So that's how I meant that if we overpromise, then...
Absolutely, no, but that was correct. So I was saying I didn't know whether he had anything to add from what you said about the sort of the dangers of making it very directed and almost populist. So a difficult balance to strike in science, as a global public good, but just literally 20, 30 seconds. I don't know if you wanted to...
Well, I think it is not something where and it's also a typically 21st century development. I don't think it's something where we can completely escape. I don't think that we can. Society is investing a lot of money into science, so there are expectations, and it's all a matter about managing these expectations. And I think it is absolutely fair that society, via the political decision mechanisms that we have, as imperfect as they are, has a say on. On what should be prioritized, but at the societal level, mm-hmm. not at the scientific level. It's mm-hmm. not for political decision makers to say, well, these are the scientific questions that you as scientists should address. I think that would be, and we are in agreement. That's not for the for the science to decide. But nevertheless, there are expectations that some of the largest societal challenges can only be solved with science, not entirely through science. That's the overpromise. If we go around and say science will solve climate change, I think that's the overpromise, where I fully agree with you. But there will be certainly useful contributions and important and maybe hopefully decisive contributions from science. And I think it's in that sense it's a matter of allocation of resources. I think it is fair that these resources are allocated to. So the distinction here is between societal challenges, where I think society should have a say. What are the relevant societal challenges where we would like to see scientists contribute? But these challenges are not research questions, and they need to be articulated into research questions, and that's for the scientists to do. There, I think we are in agreement.
We have 4 minutes, so you need to be super punchy.
Very quick. I just want to give an example for the fact that scientists know best, and that serves society. So the EU has very wisely installed not only an ERC, but also an EIC, a European Innovation Council, the purpose of which is to take discoveries, help discoverers to take their ideas to market. Of the 43 projects that were selected for funding by the EIC this spring, 26 came from people who'd previously held an ERC grant. So it works. It works. COVID and that together show it works. Basically. And by the way, I think the only thing we really have to talk about is the threat, the undermining of our values by people who use them for ill purposes. That's the only thing we think. Okay. I think we should think about.
Are you both relating to this general conversation? But okay, I'll come because you raised your hand, and then I will come to you, Andrea. Yes, thank you so much, Magdalena.
So I would like to suggest that we have to focus on the balance, and that's the word you used, Kat, when you asked the question. Historically, we had much more emphasis, much more spending, and much more associated importance to the so-called ivory tower research. I'm not saying that that research is unimportant. Most emphatically, I think it's very important. But it's also important that we look to other type of research. And you know, there's actually a wonderful example of this within the pages of Nature. Historically, we were focused on academic impact. So impact in that, you know, undirected or rather directed exclusively by researchers' science. We continue to publish a lot of that research, but we're increasingly interested in research that has real life impact alongside with the other research. And I think it's a question of that balance. I think researchers know what's interesting, what comes out of research that they've already concluded, what other burning questions are there. But let's not ignore the society, especially when we talk about implementation science. I think that science has to unfold in a context, and we need that balance between the science that is very close to real life impact, which until recently, let's face it, was much less recognized, much less appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Please let me come to Andrea, and then I will come back to you. You have been very much in listening mode, but a couple great questions come in online. Thank you, because I was actually going to ask both of them myself, so brilliant. Over to you.
Thank you. I just want to pick on this point of science as a global public good, because science considered to be a human right, and also that I think that we see, because of the Russian war in Ukraine, that science and knowledge production is a security issue. And here we actually have a turning point. So what we are discussing here is a very pre-war discussion, I have to say, because the war actually proved that there is knowledge which is harmful, there are institutions which are not working, and this global concept is very Eurocentric, which is, I would say, between London, Netherlands, not going down to Marseille, but you know, going to somewhere to Berlin, Vienna, I don't know. But you know, this is what you call global. And what is interesting is, if we go back to this thread, that there are very different traditions of knowledge production and different ways of academia and different methodologies. And interestingly, they are challenging these liberal concepts, and they are doing it with this decolonizing framework. And this very interesting twist, how the decolonizing science is actually now appropriated by illiberal forces in order that to, from inside, again, going through the cracks, instrumentalize, empty, take over, and use the resources from the European taxpayers is something we should be, again, addressing.
Okay. Thank you very much. And you were all, well, first of all, I was going to say to you, from listening, anything you want to add, and then I'm going to pose a couple of these questions. So,
okay, well, first of all, thank you, Katrina, for having described me as someone in the listening mode. I will certainly report this good news to my family and to my collaborators. They don't always share this enthusiasm. The The second observation is, and refers to the to all the comments that were actually made, is that we are now in connection with this change, or at least so reduction of the individual knowledge and ownership of science, more to a more collaborative, more to a social type of knowledge. We also have a tendency to use the technological transformation of the digital transformation in a binary sense. And binary sense means yes and no. Doesn't mean, well, perhaps, gray. So we tend to judge very much now in black and white terms. And science is ostensibly also a gray action activity. So when Maria said before, to say 98% of likelihood is an extremely high likelihood. And in the general public, it is perceived, well, it could still be 2%. It is because, since you mentioned that I am an Egyptologist, instead of learning statistics and informatics, young students of Egyptology learn from the first semester the vocalization of the adverbial forms in Egyptian, which is very important because I study it, but it doesn't really help precisely this emphasis on this method. So I think there's a certain need also to inform the importance of statistics, judgment on likelihood of science in a context, in a societal context, in which rather the binary mode is privileged, and thus with a certain tendency to polarization, populism, and all the aspects we consider.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to jump now, and again, if there's a question, can you hold that thought momentarily? Is it within this issue of open science? I can see you not. Is it to keep within this thematic area?
The gatekeepers and the open science.
The gatekeeper. Okay, I'm going to let you make that comment just before we move into another area, if I may. I'm just going to ask a couple of things that have come in. Magdalena, if I may, here we go. Everything in a scientific career is about first author and last author publications. Better than your competitors you do not share data with. How can we hope to initiate open and collaborative science when the current metric of scientific success is counter to this idea? There is agreement from the gentleman on your left. So, what would you like to say?
Absolutely, and it's a question that was obviously directed to me. I think it's a question to all of us. Yeah. Because all of us, in various capacities that we have as those who sit on interview panels, those who review papers, those who are editors, all of us contribute to this status quo. I think it's a great shame that that's the state we're in, and the scientific ecosystem is poorer for it, because we don't recognize mentorship, we don't recognize collaboration, we don't recognize teaching, we don't recognize data sharing anywhere near as much as we should. The issue with first or last author, of course, in some disciplines, there are other ways of resolving this. There is alphabetical authorship and other ways of solving it. But by and large, in most natural sciences, that is indeed the case. Nature and other journals of Nature Portfolio, and of course other publishers have had other ways of dealing with it, for years now have introduced a very granular author contribution statement, which allows the reader to look at that statement to say who on this hypothetical paper of 300 authors has contributed what to that paper. Because if you have this increasingly collaborative research, you cannot look at the first and last author alone. It makes no sense however you slice it.
Okay.
So we have to change it. But all of us are responsible for it. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yes, and then to Mark. Yep.
We are having three different problems here. One is the evaluation of academic work. The other is the issue of how to publish, how to make it available, and the third is the societal impact. So, I mean, we will get to the academic evaluation and assessment at a certain point, but here I just would like to say that as long as the profit-oriented publishing houses like the Springer and the others are actually thriving on the mostly unpaid work of reviewers, authors, and basically skims that money. I mean, the academic publishing is more lucrative than weapon industry. So maybe this is the time to think critically about who has got what kind of right to publishing. And there are lots of interesting alternative models. So I just would like to encourage us not to only look at the existing models, but see behind that. And I'm really very curious about the question at the back.
We will hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to cut in on you guys to be swift. You were shaking your head there. You were not. So let me just let you say your two penneth, and I will come to you, Mark. Yes.
Just to say that the economic model of publishing has nothing to do with open science, open access, or rewards for publishing ware. That is really, I'm afraid, a big misunderstanding. They shouldn't be muddled.
Mark. And then certainly the gentleman, we've met before, right?
Well, I think there I would slightly disagree, because I think they are tied together. The economic model of the past economic model of publishing was based on paywalls, so on not open science, and it was also based on the fact, yes, that scientific publications has become so dominant, and I think we're now at the second topic, which is research culture, has become such an over-dominant outcome by which research and researchers are valued, and that is of course part of the economic model which some of the journals or publishers do fully exploit. And I think what was said by Magdalena is extremely important, because these tendencies or these attempts to reform the research assessment system, I mean, reform is a big word, maybe just taking out or attenuating some of the more detrimental effects. And I think what we have seen, unfortunately, in the past is that there is this overemphasis on publications, that scientists and researchers are valued almost exclusively by that. And now there is this hierarchy of journals as well, the hierarchy of author position. All this makes it that we're discarding many other valuable outputs. And I think that's where we need to move away from. We should stop counting papers and reading papers, as some of my colleagues would say. We should stop using these kinds of fallacious metrics where we judge people by the number of citations, which has been shown to be a flawed metric. And so there is scientific evidence. That let me finish with the ultimate calamity, which in my view are the university rankings, which is everyone knows that they are on. It's flawed methodology. It's a system where I can only gain if someone else, so I can only go up in the ranking as university if some other university goes down. So it stresses the competition aspect, whereas I think what we should do is collaboration. And to finish, I would quote my colleague Stephen Curry, who says that rankings may be useful for a football tournament, but to gauge such a complex activity like research and university, they are wholly inappropriate, and I think we should...
I think you should just say rankings are rank, you know, in that English word. There we go. That's even quicker, isn't it? That's a good slogan. They just rank. They don't work. Okay, last one from you. The gentleman in the corner, the gentleman here. So we got to be shorter than you would want to be. Sorry, my lovely people. Yes.
Okay, very short. I think we got a little bit tangled up in many different issues, but the answer to the question that was posed from the virtual audience really lies in us diversifying what we value in the research ecosystem. Yeah. It's less to do with how we publish. It doesn't matter if we publish in another way, but publishing is the only thing that we value. We will not have solved that problem.
Okay. I will come to you afterwards, please, Antonio. But first of all, the gentleman at the back. Beautifully concise, please. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Angelos Harlaftis, EPAFOS Advisors. We represent always, as you know, the EcoWaves movement, a pan-European regional movement which is based in direct democracy, in science and in ecology. So when the open science issue opened 5-6 years ago at the Commission, I spoke again. I told them that they are bringing from the past the popular science. This is the open science, actually. The popular science, because we are trying all, we have the common target, how the science can be can be, how could we say, circulated to the simple citizen in order to understand what's coming, the technology, which is complicated, and he must understand in order him to take
Just hold the mic here, please.
him, the citizen, to take the decision. The scientists never take a decision, they suggest. So the open science issue for us is the popular science, which is connected to the populists who are like us. What are the populists? The populists are a part of our society, they follow this democratic system, and when they govern, they are the same like the other parties. The globalists, I agree very much with Ms. Andrea. You opened the issue as it is, as it must be opened. The gatekeepers.
Okay.
The knowledge has limits. The gatekeepers are the keepers of the wisdom. Scientists are not wise always.
Thank you. I need to ask you to round off. In the interest of time, I'm sorry.
It's my reward, please, madam.
Okay, but give me an
So the gatekeepers, they have to control and balance the things so that, let me say it in this way, downtown to be a widening of knowledge and uptown to be a limited of knowledge. We have to limit the research. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And sorry I interrupted you and I didn't realise you were coming to a close so swiftly. Okay, well, I can see some, but I'm not going to come back straight away. I promised to come to the audience and there was another hand. So hold that thought and any responses momentarily. Yes, who are you, please?
I'm
Thank
Martin
you.
Adler from the Initiative for Science in Europe. In connection with this open science issue, that if there's not going to be a transition to the reward system, especially for young scientists, for open science, we're not going to make any progress. I mean, the DORA declaration and things like that have been around for a long time, and the progress is very limited. And if we think, and we actually just published a paper on the issue of assessment for open science, because this is of special concern to young scientists. It's very easy for a Nobel Prize winner to publish openly, because anyway, the reward is already there. But for young scientists, this is a pressing issue, and I hope that you discuss this in the next discussion.
Okay, thank you. I said next 10 minutes, next days, next discussion. I was wondering where you were going there. Let me come to you, Antonio. We heard some, very passionate input there about open science, about gatekeepers, and we heard very important distinction. What about young scientists? And when we're talking about these kinds of rewards and measurements. So over to you.
So we have, once again, a kind of dilemma here. Because we were talking before about this evolution from an attention only reserved to the production of science to an attention also devoted to translational science, to conveying the results of science in society in one way or the other, including the political level. Now, the problem is that the quality assurance in the two ways is a very different one, and the reward mechanisms are different. That means that at the level of the science production, we are linked to quality, to scientific quality, and that tends to be ever more specialized for very good reasons, because we tend to work in one particular interdisciplinary domain. On the other hand, without being an economist, on the other hand, the translational science is devoted to global challenges, is devoted to more to this interdisciplinary dimension, to having an inclusive attitude to science. And there we have two very different parameters of judgment. So it's extremely difficult to combine, on the one hand, what is needed in order to have better physics, in order to, and what is needed in order to have a better integration of physics into the global challenge. These are two different mechanisms, and it's not easy to combine them, because our systems of reward are very geared towards the first, towards the production of science, and less towards the translation of science. That's the way it has.
Interesting. Maria, you were sort of listening very, you've been quiet momentarily. No comments, nothing to say? Would you like a cup of coffee? No, lots to say. Well, let me just take it on a bit. I mean, there was a question, and we can move on and just explore more into the area you took us into on research assessment and other things we need to look at in terms of promotion and reward, diversity, inclusivity. Let's just talk a little bit about that. What was I going to ask you? Something absolutely critical that's just gone right out of my head, which is so bloody annoying. Yes, this question. since you brought it obviously in your keynote, who is responsible to ask for open science? Let's just tie that off. Universities, governments, UNESCO. That was a question that came in, thank you, from our audience online.
Well, I think we're all responsible for different aspects of it.
Are you on there?
It's red.
Oh, okay. Hold it
Okay.
right here.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Great.
We're all responsible for different aspects of it. And, you know, Magdalena, you say, looking only at the publication. So there's one thing. What do we look at? Publications or other things, being a good colleague, and how do we look at it? The impact factor is about, or journal ranking or whatever, is how we look at it, not what we look at. And what we look at differs in different settings. A university who hires, you know, a faculty who hires a new colleague has different interest from the ERC, who has to fund somebody who does good science, who is promising and who's likely to produce something exciting and new. Of course, we'd all prefer to have good citizens, you know, the colleague who takes part in committees, who does their bit of reviewing journals or reviewing grants. But ultimately, if you want only the good science to be done, then you look at different criteria. And I think we have to keep that in mind. The what? And I'm sorry, publication is the way we communicate, and it is the value that defines the quality of a researcher as a researcher, not as a colleague, not as a good citizen, etc. I think we really have to keep these things apart and not muddle them. So that's what I'm saying, we have different responsibilities. And I really want to come back to this responsibility, which I think is far more important, and that is protecting our values of truth, honesty, and, I mean, truth is what we're talking about. And if that's undermined by academies in our neighboring countries and by politicians, then the rest of this debate we're having here, we can forget about it.
Over to you, please, Andrea, and then Magdalena, you wanted to comment. Thank you.
Thank you. About the research assessment. So,
hang on. Does it more naturally tie together? Okay, perfect. Beg your pardon. Carry on. Yes.
So this is about the ranking and the peer review system. So I think that this existing system, again, a pre-war system, pre-war in the sense of the Russian war, and also because of this poly-crisis what we are facing. And this kind of system, what we have is the ranking of the journals, plus the impact factors. This has been fantastically hijacked by the illiberal forces. And I wrote this paper about the illiberal academic authorization, how the different illiberal governments are actually influencing through their appointed loyal scientists, this putting together the list of journals which count. Let me give you an example. This is Poland. The Polish, in the Polish system, those journals which are published locally have got more points than the international journals in some disciplines. So there is a very different parallel system which is being developed. So that's, but using the already existing infrastructure, language about excellence, impact, outreach, indices. So that's why it's so difficult to track this, because exactly the same neoliberal managerial language is used, like in this case, but under a very different ideological pretext.
I'm going to stop you there, okay? Thank you for this, Magdalena, and then I'm going to come to you, Mark, and steer in a little bit of a different direction and expand a bit on the research assessment area. Yes.
So my comment is going to expand from this on the side of the moving towards the inclusion.
Yeah.
The discussion here, for good reasons, considering the focus of this this meeting, is exclusively focused on academia. Research, of course, is not just done in academia. Many of you here collaborate with the private sector also, or perhaps have been or intend to be part of it. And we have to remember, when we talk about open science, when we talk about transforming science, we need to think about the whole ecosystem. Many of the things that we discuss here don't directly apply to science that's done in the private sector, but many do. And certainly research culture that is somewhere in the fold that we're going to discuss is part of it as well. There's so many fruitful collaborations between the private and public sector, and we have to be conscious of the fact that we have to include that sphere of research in our discussion of open science, transforming science, and indeed creating a better research culture.
Thank you. Before, the one I'm going to just tell you what I'm going to come to you first and ask is this, to think also, and you've led me there, and then I will take a question from you. Just a moment. Thank you. Just so you can think about this is, indeed, as you say, you know, it's important, and some of it does indeed apply to the private sector, but it's the relationships in terms of transforming, you know, research cultures and research assessments, that dynamic between the academies, the academics, the funding agencies, the publishers, the governments, just looking a little bit more at the relationship that also drives that transformation. But first of all, over to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Federica Rosetto from Elsevier, so maybe I wanted to add another voice from publisher. I think here we have actually a great opportunity to develop research assessment in a collaborative way, being very inclusive, avoiding the polarization. I really think publishers are actually doing a lot to move away from imperfector. I mean, at Elsevier, we have 30 partnerships across different academics, different universities, really looking into how to create a basket of metrics, which is not only quantitative, but adds the qualitative part, which takes into consideration not only papers, but all type of objects. So I think it's really an opportunity. I suppose Mark Shields will talk about the coalition of the willing, which is looking into research assessment. We would like to be part of those discussions, so we just, you know, open up to the opportunity to be contributing with some of the thinking, the type of pilots we are testing, because, yeah, truly it's important that there is an opportunity to broaden the way that researchers assess and include different objects of research, but at the same time also the different level of engagement they have across, you know, societal impact, innovation, biopatents, et cetera, et cetera. So just a message from publisher.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to directly go to the lady behind you, please, if I may.
Yes, hello. I am Shira Menoni, currently working at RTD at the European Commission, and I would like to draw the attention on how are we going to better, perhaps, assess interdisciplinary science. Because what I've heard before was that on the one hand you have a very specific, in-depth knowledge in one discipline, physics, for example, and on the other you have the communication and the transfer to other audiences. But in between, we also have interdisciplinary research that is done by people from different disciplinary backgrounds that needs to blend together the best of their knowledge for a common goal. And this is asked by the European Commission with the stakeholders. So how this type of research, which is different, and in my point of view, not B with respect to NA, it's different.
Okay, hold that thought. I'm telling you why I'm telling you to hold that thought, because who'd have thought it? It's 5 minutes before we're supposed to stop, okay? That's how tricky it is. So, and I want to give you, I think you wanted to respond here, and I wanted to give you some space to come at this assessment from another angle. But let me give the floor to you, Maria.
Well, the interdisciplinary is, of course, it's a good question, and it's not easy. I think there's a lot of evidence. It doesn't matter whether we all believe that this is so, but there is a lot of evidence that at the interfaces of disciplines, a lot happens. In fact, we know this ourselves when we go to conferences and start talking about our research interests with somebody from outside. Sparks happen, and you start coming up with new ideas about how to solve your own research. So I don't think there is a lot of need to push interdisciplinary, and it's in fact questionable if we even know what it means. But it should be pushed, and again, at the ERC, there are programs that do exactly that are intended to bring people from different fields together to solve problems that they alone can't solve. So I think it's very widely known, and institutions know it. They hire people who complement each other rather than feedback on each other, you know, all stew in the same soup. I think it's an important thing, but I think there's general and wide knowledge that this needs to be done, and it's not that hard.
I'm not deliberately not coming to you. 2 quick interjections on this, because it's nice to hear other points of view from both you, Magdalena, and also, please, from Antonio. Thank you.
I'll go first since I'm holding the microphone. I think this is a very important question, and again, a question that, because it addresses the issue of silos. So your, Kat, your sort of setting of the new direction for our conversation, talking about how funders, publishers, researchers can come around the table, that touches at the fact that we are siloed here. We all are part of the same research ecosystem, and yet we insufficiently often sit at the same table. That's what my colleague from Elsevier was also referring to. It's exactly the same problem within the research community itself, how we teach science, even though we increasingly recognize the importance of multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. We still, if you think about any of you, about your university department, it's extremely, actually, it's most of them are organized in very sort of old-fashioned, traditional ways, siloed ways. So I think all of us have to think about this. You know, Maria made an absolutely right point that we all recognize its importance, but there's a lot of work to be done, starting from education through to recognition and evaluation of multidisciplinarity.
2 more GIF length points on this. Matthijs, I am going to go to 10-2 because we can pick it up later, okay, even if we go over 5 minutes. So 1, 2, and then coming to Mark. Yep, well, super concise.
I think that what I'm going to say fits very well what Magdalena just stressed, and that is that in fact there is a third issue here that plays a core role in the discussion, which is the distinction between science and the scientific institutions where science is practiced and realized, mainly universities. And indeed, it is so that many of the discussions we are having here are discussions that are internal to the university systems. For example, so decisions at the level of hiring a professor, if they are left, I must say, to the scientific community of this professor, chances are that the person who is going to be hired will only be of the disciplinary type. However, the institutions at the leadership level know that there are other requirements now, that there are requirements in terms of inclusion, in terms of interdisciplinarity. Yeah. So there's sometimes a kind of debate, a kind of dialectic within the institutions themselves in this transformation.
Thank you, very good point. Andrea, super GIF length, please.
Probably this is the last chance I have the mic, so thanks again for this fantastic...
No, it's not, but you can keep it short. Go on. You're going to have to you're all going to say a last word on science communication that we haven't yet heard, but first of all, you and then Mark, please.
So what I think is really important to move out from our comfort zone, and probably, you know, interdisciplinarity is really not useful at all, because in that sense, you know, the COVID was not defeated by an interdisciplinary research. What it actually showed that, and that we learned yesterday, is that, you know, how the societal element was basically because of the underfunded and university and research system was not given a place at the table. And the other is the internationalization of academia, because if those different illiberal institutions are coming to your door and knocking on your office door saying, I have got, I don't know how many millions of euros, would you like to cooperate with this research project? And we already see that this is happening, that you know, internationalization is a way of getting into the European and the American higher educational and research system, basically to take all the values away. So
okay, I need you to round off. Sorry, I've got to. Yeah. Okay. No, I know. I've got a sort of concrete. I can't. I do the maths. It's not me. Go on. Just finish your sentence, and I will come to Mark, because I've got to take these people in. Go on. So be careful with the internationalization.
The last point I wanted to make about the internationalization and interdisciplinarity is the ranking, because I'm sure you know that there is this new attempt to include human rights and academic freedom into the system, and that would mean that all the Chinese universities are going to the bottom, and forecastable outcome will be an alternative parallel system. What we already see in the publication sector, we already see in the university system, and we already see in the academic research system. And I'm not sure that's a good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sorry, and I'm trying desperately to keep to the time, and Mark's been in listening mode. What did you hear, and what do you think about these relationships between, you know, those different stakeholders that I said in terms of transforming the way, you know, research is assessed?
From a more general point, I think what we have witnessed is over the decades is indeed that from this more ivory tower individualistic science, we have moved into much more cooperative, globalized science. And it is much more in society. Whether we like it or not, it is a fact. We're getting more funding from society, but we're also solicited much more. We have seen it in the COVID-19 crisis. We see it currently in the climate crisis. So science research is much more within society at the center. And I think that's where we probably need to adapt our research culture and our research value system. I often hear that there is both competition and collaboration in science and in research, and this is certainly true. However, I believe that these two do not have the same status. I think collaboration is really constitutive to science. You cannot do science and research without collaboration. Competition is much more of a side effect, which we may like to a certain extent, which we may engage with to a certain extent, but I don't think it is truly constitutive of science. And I think we should adapt our research culture and our research value to stress out more this collaboration aspect. And when I say collaboration, it's not just collaboration in between scientists, but it's really also this outreach and interaction and communication with society at large. That's what it is.
And on that, because you've taken us nicely, and that's what I said I would ask each of you as an outro, I think you were here to hear the comments already made on science communication, so let's not necessarily reiterate, but exactly on that, I think I was joking with Christiane at the beginning, saying, oh, you don't want to be on a talk show, you don't strive to be, that's what she was saying, but what do we need to be? What have we learned from this pandemic? What could we do differently in terms of science communication in an era when, okay, however much we have the percentage of trust, there is an incredible demand and there are incredibly dissenting and contrarian voices. What would you change? One thing, what would you change? 10 seconds.
One thing, okay, it has been said before, but I'm going to repeat it. I think we have to change the way we educate and we teach science, and it should start in primary schools, in secondary schools, certainly, because there is what we have seen, or what is particularly difficult to communicate, and that's the one lesson of the COVID crisis, is that the corpus of scientific knowledge is not uniform. There are well-established, I don't dare to use the word truths, but let's say fact, which have stood the test of time over many decades, sometimes over many centuries, but there is also much uncertainty, and then there are even knowledge which is controversial. And that's something which we do not teach. That's something which the public has great difficulties in grasping. Sometimes they tell us, but you don't agree in between each other. But that's normal. It's part of the scientific process.
And then they need to be told that.
I think where much education is needed.
Okay, thank you. A 20-second answer, please. Thank you very much.
So my answer is, to us, the researchers, be honest. Don't promise something you don't do. I tell my own graduate students that if they write a paper about how the interior of the cell works, they don't say, and this might help to cure cancer. Don't say it unless you actually are working on it in order to do cancer. You've got to be honest. If we're not honest in ourselves, and I see it in grant applications, people write about this thing, and then this will, you know, deal with climate change. That's not why they're doing it. Be honest, and then, yes, teach from smallest childhood on the value of science and the way science is done.
Okay, and also that reinforces, of course, don't promise what you can't, credibility, which down the line is what you critically need in communication. Yes, Andrea.
Thank you. I would say that communication will not change this, university education will not change this, because there is an existential scare and a moral panic out there. And the science is expected to do for magic, which was the origin of science, that you actually form magic, and that's exactly what you see in the grant applications, that they are actually promising you to perform magic. And in our disenchanted world, I think what science needs to do is go back to enchantment, and not to shy away from using like this format. And I have to say, this is really a great way of communicating our ideas in a very different way than reading up a paper which everybody is falling asleep. So,
Okay.
enchantment.
I love that. That's a nice one. Tweet it, somebody, or I will. Magdalena, yes.
So I think we all, and by we I mean all the different stakeholders in the research ecosystem, have to own communication. Everybody has a role to play and will communicate the story in a different way. We have to communicate the how in addition to what was said already. And the final thing, I think a lot of the time when we talk about communication, we actually mean broadcasting information. I think we should be more inclusive in that communication. It should be more of a dialogue. I think we'll be more effective. We will be more engaging. Maybe that's close to enchantment as well. I don't know. I think it's worth trying.
And what's the mechanism to achieve that? What mechanism do you see for getting that?
For getting the dialogue?
Yes. Give just one idea of a mechanism that you don't see for getting that dialogue.
I actually think openly engaging with open live audience or even online engagement. So we understand what it is that the society has problems with, doesn't understand what the science is delivering. So a little bit of feedback, in other words, to guide our own communication further on.
Thank you. Last word to the listener then. Said it again,
right,
haven't I?
So how appropriate.
I hope your wife is watching online.
My take home would be a message to the academic community as a whole: more collaboration, less competition.
We got chuckles. I think the chuckling was a rueful chuckle. That's such a good placement of that word there. Okay, first of all, thank you. Sorry to have to do that. But you see, it's hard, but you know this because you are all experts in your domain and you've done this 1,000 times. So warm thanks to Professor Maria Leptin, Professor Antonio Loprieno, Mark Schiltz, Dr. Magdalena Skipper, and Andrea Peto. Thank you very much. Could you please give them a warm round of applause? They've been amazing.